Caitlin Clark and Stephanie White are both known for their undeniable influence in basketball. But when the two found themselves at the center of a groundbreaking revelation about the Wnba, it was more than just the usual headlines. Their shared moment, which made waves through the sports community, highlighted not only their individual journeys but a fresh perspective on the Wnba itself. Clark, a standout college player with a flair for jaw-dropping plays and a personality to match, and White, a seasoned basketball veteran and coach, became the talk of the town as they dropped a bombshell that left fans and analysts wide-eyed. But before we proceed further, don't forget to smash that like button and subscribe. Caitlin Clark had been the darling of college basketball, turning heads with her fierce competitiveness and scoring prowess. She had that kind of swagger that kept audiences glued to their screens, mixing no-look passes with deep three-pointers that seemed to defy logic. It wasn't just the points she racked up, but the way she carried herself on the court. Her sharp eyes, quick smile, and occasional smirk were as much a part of her game as her shooting percentage. Clark's ability to energize a crowd or silence an opposing bench spoke to the magnetic pull she possessed. On the other side of the equation stood Stephanie White, whose career spanned years in the professional game. White was known for her grit as a player and her tactical mind as a coach. She had played in the WNBA during its early years and witnessed the evolution of the league firsthand. Her approach to the game combined an old-school toughness with a keen sense of how the modern game was changing. White's transition from player to coach brought her a fresh lens on the challenges and potential of women's basketball. With a reputation for being both honest and passionate, she was never one to back down from a pointed question or difficult conversation. The moment that shook the Wnba began in a setting far from the roar of the stadiums, during a joint interview that was supposed to cover run-of-the-mill topics. The two were meant to discuss the state of women's basketball, their experiences, and what lay ahead for the sport. As Clark leaned back, spinning a pen between her fingers, a habit she'd picked up during long post-practice media sessions, White adjusted her chair and shot a knowing glance at her young counterpart. What started as a few casual remarks soon spiraled into something much larger. Clark, who usually spoke with a blend of youthful confidence and strategic vagueness, dropped a comment that hit like a buzzer beater from half-court. She talked about how she and many other young players felt disconnected from the path leading to the Wnba. She pointed out the widening gap between college excitement and the professional experience, noting that there seemed to be a lack of incentives for players to pursue a career in the Wnba when overseas options sometimes offered more lucrative and compelling alternatives. The room seemed to hold its breath as White, instead of redirecting the conversation, nodded in agreement. Then, with the same straightforwardness that had defined her career, White added that the Wnba had not adapted quickly enough to the changing landscape of basketball. She hinted that structural changes were overdue, including how the league approached contracts, endorsements, and player well-being. The energy shifted. What was supposed to be a lighthearted discussion had turned into a deep dive into the realities facing women's professional basketball. White's words were not a mild critique, they were a rallying cry. She spoke about the need for the Wnba to rethink its model, to attract not just top-tier talent, but to keep them invested in staying. Her tone was not angry but determined. Clark watched with a mix of surprise and admiration, her eyes lighting up as if to say, "Now we're getting somewhere." It was rare to see a young player and an experienced coach on the same page, let alone agreeing publicly on a topic that most danced around. Clark, emboldened by White's statements, chimed in with anecdotes about friends who had opted for international leagues, lured by higher salaries and a more flexible lifestyle. She talked about players returning from abroad, speaking highly of the support they received overseas compared to the Wnba. There was a candidness in her voice, one that carried the weight of someone who felt deeply for the sport but was unafraid to acknowledge its faults. The significance of this conversation wasn't just in what was said, but in who was saying it. Here was Caitlin Clark, a player who could soon be the face of the league, and Stephanie White, who had dedicated much of her life to professional women's basketball, both sounding the alarm. This was not a case of disgruntled outsiders lobbing criticisms from the sidelines. This was a future star and an established leader saying that things needed to change and fast. Their statements raised immediate implications for the WNBA. The league, already aware of the criticisms around pay disparity, fan engagement, and market growth, now faced a direct challenge from two influential figures. The conversation sent ripples through locker rooms, coaching meetings, and boardrooms. What did it mean for a player like Clark to express doubts about transitioning into the league? and for White, who had helped shape many aspects of professional women's basketball, to say that the system was outdated. It pointed to the need for significant shifts, not just in policy but in vision. The revelations from Clark and White also stirred conversations about what players valued in their careers. The talk moved beyond just salaries to include the quality of life, support systems, and global appeal. Clark noted that players were no longer content to accept being underpromoted or underfunded simply for the chance to play at home. They wanted full careers that didn't require making trade-offs between visibility and compensation. White highlighted that while passion was abundant, passion alone didn't pay bills or secure futures. The players, many of whom took to social media to share their thoughts after the interview aired, echoed these sentiments. Some younger athletes expressed relief that someone like Clark had put words to what they'd been feeling. Veteran players reflected on their journeys, noting the tough choices they'd made between playing in the Wnba or heading overseas for better financial opportunities. It became clear that the discussion Clark and White initiated was not going to fade quickly. It would instead ignite broader debates about what the future of women's basketball should look like. The implications extended beyond just the players. Sponsors and investors began reevaluating how they approached partnerships with the league. If two of the most respected voices were willing to publicly acknowledge deep-rooted issues, it hinted that change might be necessary to keep up with evolving player expectations and audience interests. Endorsements, usually safe and scripted, suddenly had more at stake. Companies that had dipped their toes into women's sports with safe bets now had to decide whether to push for a deeper commitment or pull back. In coaching circles, White's statements were dissected with the same intensity reserved for game film. The honesty of her words carried weight because she had been there, lived it, and worked through the highs and lows. Coaches debated what it would mean if more top talent hesitated to join the league, and how that might change recruitment strategies. It also brought up the question of whether the Wnba needed to reframe its identity, not just as an option after college, but as the pinnacle of a woman's basketball career. Meanwhile, Clark's words were also a reminder of how influential the voices of young stars could be. She had a massive following and a magnetic pull that could bring fresh eyes to the sport. If she and her peers saw room for improvement, it was a signal to everyone involved that the conversation needed to be taken seriously. There was a sense of urgency, and Clark's playful yet determined demeanor suggested she wasn't just speaking off the cuff. She was reflecting a broader sentiment. The announcements sparked informal discussions in college locker rooms and gyms across the country. Players who once aspired only to make it to the Wnba started to think more critically about what that path might entail. The excitement around playing at the highest level still burned bright, but now it came with questions. What kind of league would they be stepping into? Would they have the support they needed to build sustainable careers? Coaches began to realize that while skill development remained essential, preparing players for the realities of professional life had become equally important. The implications of their remarks opened up a new chapter in how the Wnba might chart its future. Conversations about change, often confined to quiet rooms and behind closed doors, were now out in the open, spurred by the candid reflections of two influential figures. Whether the league would respond with immediate reforms or more gradual adjustments remained to be seen, but one thing was certain: Clark and White had set the stage for a new wave of dialogue. Don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe to our channel for more engaging content. We thrive on your feedback, so be sure to leave your thoughts in the comments section below. Until next time, keep discovering and stay tuned.